my name is Kristen Butler, and I work in event marketing for a creative agency. I was born in Rochester, New York. My parents divorced when I was 2. I don't really recall there ever being a dual parent home. As long as I can remember, it's always been me with my mother. She worked as a secretary, so we didn't make a lot of money. Being a single parent home, things were paycheck to paycheck, usually. We hopped around for a few years, again, because we weren't financially very stable on her single income. We had lived in a few different places. We ended up at one point in a rundown motel in a pretty crummy neighborhood in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and my mom was working really long shifts. She was shipping me off to a babysitter every day, and it wasn't until a few months later that I finally worked up the courage to tell my mom that the babysitter's 21-year-old son had been sexually abusing me. She believed me, yeah, and we reported it. I went through a series of interviews. They decided to drop the case, and the explanation that they gave was that they thought I was making it up to get attention because my mom worked so much. I was 9. I've seen that it is often the families that don't have resources, the minority families, the poor families, that end up having their cases dropped because there just aren't enough resources. I remember coming home and there was a message on the answering machine and my mom hit the button, because that was what you did back then, and the messages started playing, and it was there was one from a representative of the DA's office, and so I actually heard firsthand at the time that they were telling my mother that they were not pursuing the case because they felt that I was making it up to get her attention. My mom's mental health started to decline shortly after, and as a result, she became increasingly abusive, both verbally and physically, so I was dealing with that as well. The severity of her illness really started to take effect until I was probably 9 or 10. I developed some really poor eating habits, and I think there was a number of reasons why. The first being that I obviously was dealing with very negative emotions, and I think was eating for comfort. Also, my mom had signed me up with an agent, and I was very actively going out on acting and modeling auditions at the time. And the message that I got consistently was, oh, you know, your daughter's really talented, she has a lot of potential, she's got a pretty face, but she's too fat. She needs to lose weight if she's going to make it in this industry. And so my mother proceeded to put me on diets, and then, like I said, I was maybe 10, so I was pretty young. Anything that came out in the Women's Day magazine that month, I had been on it at some point. So I've been on the cabbage soup diet, I've been on Atkins, all from, you know, 5th grade on. And then I think the third thing was that food was inconsistently available when I was a kid. So there were times we'd be doing better off and I didn't have to worry. And when food was around, I would eat it like there was no tomorrow, because I honestly didn't know if I would have food the next day. We were not allowed to have ice cream or cookies or anything in the house. That was always considered really bad. And there were some days where I ate mayonnaise sandwiches for dinner, just 2 slices of bread and a glob of mayo, because that's what was available. So I was embarrassed being on the diets because it often meant having to pack certain things in a lunch bag when I went to school, and kids would make comments, not necessarily make fun of me, but make comments about the fact that I was eating a block of cheese for lunch. So I felt different in that sense, but also I think the way it impacted me was just feeling that I wasn't good enough the way I was and the way I looked, and I had to fit somebody else's ideal image. I would steal change out of my mom's purse so that I could buy a cookie at school. And I'd be sitting there eating the cookie thinking, this is really bad. This is what I'm told not to do, and this is what's going to make me fat. But right now, this cookie is making me feel better than anything else has. I did start attaching food with emotions, from about that point. The abuse was, it was verbal, really nasty stuff, calling me names, telling me I was stupid, that people wouldn't love me the way I was. It was anything from that all the way to really bad physical abuse, being dragged around by my hair, kicked repeatedly. I had Windex sprayed in my face. I had an iron thrown at my body. There were days that I had to stay home from school. She would force me to stay home from school because I had welts on my body, and we didn't want people knowing what was happening. The acting got put on hold. I think I reached a breaking point when I was about 13, where someone at an audition ripped me apart. I'd gone in for an audition a couple of months prior, and he raved about me and was using my monologue as an example of what talent looks like. And he said, I'm coming back in a couple of months. I'm bringing a few people with me to LA for pilot season. I want you to audition for some things. In the meantime, get your hair cut, and because you look a little too old with your hair long, and do this and do that, and I'll be back. And when he came back and I met with him again and I performed for him again, he proceeded to rip apart my acting and my talent and skill. And I know that's not what it was. It was the fact that things had gotten really bad, and in that couple of months time span, I had gained probably another 10 pounds, and I was no longer marketable. So I put a hold on that and proceeded to further isolate myself for a little while. When I was 15, we had moved in between. My mom got a job transfer, so we ended up in Arizona at that point. And I ran away. Things were just so bad, and I didn't see any other way to get out of it. So I got on a Greyhound bus headed for New York. My plan was that I was going to stay with family when I got there. And I was arrested, and I spent time in a juvenile detention center, because that is unfortunately what they do. I had done any crime, I hadn't been convicted of anything, but that's what they do with kids who run away. And it was a heartbreaking experience, but also a very enlightening experience, because I met a lot of girls who, like me, were good people. They were good girls, and they wanted to do the right thing, and they wanted to succeed in life, but they had just been dealt a really bad hand, and had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or made a few poor decisions that ultimately ended them up in juvenile detention. My options were to go into foster care in Colorado, or to go back with my mom. Living with family in New York was not an option that was given to me, and so I chose to go back with my mom, because she was the evil that I knew. Luckily, not too long after, she sat me down one day and said that she was allowing me to leave, basically kicking me out. That was a nice way of putting it. Her boyfriend at the time needed a place to stay, and he had a couple of kids, so she wanted my bedroom for them. I didn't really care about the reason. I was just happy to get out, and so welcomed with open arms by my then boyfriend's family. They took me in, they knew what was happening, and they were happy to help. And things started to pick up for me. I joined the cheerleading squad. I became more actively involved in chorus and started auditioning for solos with a little bit of a nudge from friends. The more things started to go well for me, the more anxious I got that somehow I was going to lose it all. It was like there was pressure to keep it, that any second it could all backtrack and I could end up where I was. And I was still dealing with a lot of hurt feelings and emotions. So that was when my bulimia really developed. I remember one day walking out of the house, because it was a packed house. There were 6 of us living there. and you could never get any privacy. And I walked out and into a grove of trees on the property for some privacy, and I proceeded to purge a muffin that I had had that day. And it was in that moment that I realized this is a problem. This is not a one-off thing. This has happened quite frequently, and it's become an obsessive thought. I was always yo-yoing. I never really was like morbidly obese. I was just always chubby, and I was different scales of chubby at different points in my life. Sometimes I was about 20 pounds overweight, and others I was maybe just, a little fluffy at 5 pounds extra. I did think about having my aunt take me in. She absolutely would have, and actually I did live with her for a while. There was a point when I was 14 when Child Protective Services did get involved again. This time it was my doing. I had had enough, and I went to a school counselor and told her what was happening and that I needed help. And I got lucky that this time around the CPS worker took me seriously. He didn't believe my mom. She can be charming, but he saw through that. And so he basically told her, if you don't send your daughter to live with a relative, I am going to take her into state custody. And so she did send me, and that was end of my freshman year of high school. I lived with my aunt for about 3 or 4 months and started improving, started losing weight, was doing really well, making friends, and my grades were excellent, and I was really happy and I wanted to stay there. But when my mom moved to Arizona, the CPS case doesn't cross state lines. And so there was nothing keeping her from getting me back at that point. And she did go so far as to threaten to have the police escort me on a plane back to Arizona if I didn't come on my own free will. When I was in New York and living with my aunt, and when my mom started pushing for me to go back to Arizona to live with her, I asked my aunt to go for custody of me. And we consulted with a lawyer, and the lawyer told her that she would never win because she was not a parent, that we would have better luck if my father tried. So we spoke with my father, and he agreed, and at first seemed like he was really engaged in just making sure that I was happy and I was taken care of. I flew back to stay with my mom because she was threatening to get the police involved and escort me on the plane. And the entire time I knew that my father was going for custody of me. He went for immediate custody and he didn't get it. And then she was served with papers for a full court hearing. Actually, the day that she was served, we went to my uncle's house, and she was livid, and she was screaming, and you couldn't calm her down. And when we left that day, she threatened to kill us, and she sped up. There was a semi, a big truck in front of us, an 18-wheeler on the expressway. And she sped up and said she was going to slam into the back of it and kill us both. And then at the very last minute, she slammed on her brakes. She was threatening to kill us, to kill herself, to take things away from me. And so I told my father, I was scared, and I said, please, you have to stop. You have to stop this custody battle. It's not going to end well. And he told me at that point he could not. He was too far into the process. He would not stop. And I pleaded with him. I told him it was dangerous, and that as much as this sucked, it was the better thing for me to stay there for that time. And he proceeded anyway. And so when it came time for me to tell the courts what I wanted, I said I wanted to stay with my mom, and he disowned me. When I left and I moved to New York and I started college, I was filled with hope, because that was, again, my goal had been to graduate, to get away from my mom, and I felt like I'd finally accomplished that, and now nothing could stop me. and I could go on and have a normal, happy life. And so that was my thinking. And I did. I was doing really well. I was making friends. I was cheering for the college squad, and I was doing really well with grades. I thought I was unstoppable at that point. But the thing that I learned is that actually I was going through the second hurdle. And then when I hit that age, I had to deal with all the emotions. The relationship that really comes to mind was actually a little bit later. When I was 25, I met a guy and we started dating. We ended up dating for 4 years. And he was very abusive. And I didn't realize it because he never hit me. To me, everything I had experienced as a kid skewed my reality of what a healthy relationship was. Even though he wasn't hitting me, he was in every way emotionally and verbally abusive. He was a serial cheater, and he found ways to put me in my place with things that he said and with the way that he acted. I was not allowed to have differing opinions. He would ignore me for days on end if I opposed him in any way. And it wasn't until I couldn't stand the silence anymore and I would break it by apologizing that he would grace me with his presence again. And it was eating away over time at my confidence. So I'd managed for several years to keep the weight off. Obviously the eating disorder was still going on. It was rampant. It was just this constant cycle of working out to stay skinny, to try to fight the scale, and still eating my feelings and getting rid of them. But I had managed to keep it all in check until that relationship, and I went back up. I was on a business trip in Baltimore, and he and I had already been on a rough patch for something that had happened, and I ended up receiving a phone call from a woman who told me that she had been having an affair with him. I was devastated. I called him up and he confessed to it, and I broke off the relationship. And over the next few months, he tried to hoover me back in. Basically, he told me that he'd made a huge mistake, that he really loved me, that he was just so jaded on relationships, and he was going to get this right if I would give him another chance. Or he walked the walk, he talked the talk. He went and saw a therapist at my request. But so I ended up going back. After a few months, I went back, and this was kind of the cycle of our relationship. It was me realizing something wasn't right, and I'd start to back off, and he'd pull me back in. And so he'd gotten a job transfer. He'd moved to Japan. And I ended up, with his encouragement, quitting my job, selling my brand new car, breaking my lease, putting all of my stuff in storage, and moving to Japan myself. And basically had given up my entire support system without even realizing it, and succumbing to his needs and what he wanted. And it was when I was in Japan that I realized just how miserable I was, that I'd given up all of myself to make this relationship work. And that's when I was, really depressed, and that's when I started gaining the weight again. I broke up with him shortly after we both repatriated to the US, and I had no self-esteem. I mean, at this point I really thought I was lucky to have this guy. He was successful and driven and charismatic and charming. Everyone loved him, and he was that way to everybody else. He just was a very different person to me. And getting the job offer here in Austin was that little thread of hope I think I needed at that time for me to realize that I actually was very capable on my own. I didn't need him, and I could be successful. So I broke off the relationship the week I moved here. I didn't really know what to make of life, but I knew that I was back. I was going through another change, another renaissance. I feel like my life has been a series of those moments. And so I moved to Austin. I knew I wanted to lose weight, that I wasn't happy again with how I'd let my physical fitness go in that time that I'd been with him. And a friend of mine had started doing CrossFit, I had heard about it. I had friends who did it. I always thought it was really hardcore. And so I'd never really given it much thought. But when she took it up, she changed my thinking. She said, no, you really should go check it out. It's actually a lot of fun, and it's very flexible. You don't have to be intensely fit. I mean, at the time I was running. That was my activity. I ran a lot. But she said, no, anyone can do this, and I think you would really like it. So I went. I actually signed up for my fundamentals class here at Bat City the same day that I started my new job. So it was a completely clean slate. And I felt so empowered after that class. I was hooked immediately, and I never really looked back. For me, CrossFit has changed my view on fitness so much and in such a positive way. So rather than working out to be skinny, I started thinking about it from the perspective of wanting to be stronger. I had different challenges I was facing, and they didn't involve a scale. It was more about how much weight was going on the barbell or how fast I was able to complete a WOD. And that was encouraging and really good for my emotions and for my eating disorder as well. In my mind, regardless of how I looked on the outside, I always was the fat girl who came from a broken home, who must not have been worth anything because that's what I'd been told my entire life. So I thought that I was somehow getting by on something make-believe, and that no one had figured me out yet, but they could someday. My cover could be blown. And that, I think, was the fear that I was dealing with, because I didn't have faith in myself. I didn't value my own worth, and I didn't see the positives of what I could contribute to relationships and to people around me and to myself. An eating disorder is not about food at all. Food that's a way to control a part of your life when you can't control another part of your life. And so that's what it had been about with me this entire time. It wasn't that I was addicted to foods and to the process of eating. It was that I could control that. I had full control over what went in my mouth, and I had no control over anything else. So I was using that as my outlet for gaining a sense of power. And I've learned to deal better with the things that I cannot control. I started researching this because I thought, I can't be the only one who has found a safe haven with CrossFit, with these kinds of workouts, in dealing with this eating disorder. And sure enough, there are plenty of articles. There are people, women. There are women who have completely changed their career path. They've gone and gotten coaching certificates and opened up gyms because of the way CrossFit has changed their way of dealing with food. And they had eating disorders, whether it was anorexia or binge eating or whatever. And CrossFit has been part of the cure. So I think it's my advice to anyone who's dealing with this, because I know CrossFit isn't for everyone, is just to it's hard because everyone's healing journey is different, but I think it's important to do things to understand your value, to be able to set boundaries, speak your mind, know that you're important, and to take care of yourself. One of my favorite lines that I came across while I was going through all of this healing was, you need to care for yourself 51%. And basically that's saying, yes, absolutely, you need to care for others, and you need to support their needs as well. But by taking care of yourself just a little bit more, you are better able to support yourself as well as them. And you're healthy, and your well-being stays in check that way. You're balanced. When the darkness turns to light, I will make it through the night, 'cause the angels keep watching over me. When your shadow blocks the way, I will make it through the day, 'cause the angels keep watching over me. And though I'll always walk alone, you will reap what you have sown. As I make my way down this twisted road, oh my soul, it will shine. Let it sparkle, let it spin, let the world be mine again, 'cause the angels keep watching